Good morning. It's Friday, and so I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt, so forgive me. When last we met in History 2303, we acknowledged that Moses Austin had attempted to rekindle his economic fortunes by wanting to be an impresario, to bring Anglo-Americans into Texas. But he journeyed to San Antonio and was turned down initially by Governor Martinez, but leaving heart in crestfallen from the governor's palace, Moses Austin walked out onto the square in downtown San Antonio and immediately recognized someone that he hadn't seen for years, and that was the Baron de Bastrop. And the Baron de Bastrop said, "You know what, I know the governor and I know you. I've done business with both of you before. Let me intercede for you." And within 2 weeks, the governor had changed his mind about an impresario contract allowing Moses Austin to bring settlers into Texas. But we acknowledge that Moses Austin made one fundamental mistake. Returning to the Missouri Territory, he took two individuals as his traveling companions, and those two were unscrupulous individuals. About somewhere up around the Red River, they beat up Moses Austin, left him for dead on the side of the road. But he recovered at least enough that he made his way home all the way to Potosi, Missouri, and subsequently died. It was left to Stephen F. Austin, his 27-year-old son, to fulfill Moses Austin's impresario contract. And the truth is that Stephen F. Austin was a lawyer. He had served in the United States Missouri Territory legislature. He had been a district judge before that in the United States Arkansas Territory, and he was a successful businessman. And he immediately went to San Antonio, Stephen F. Austin did, to meet with Governor Martinez to tell him about his father's death, and Martinez agreed to allow Stephen F. Austin to bring settlers into Texas. Austin immediately went to the United States, to Natchitoches, Louisiana, and in fact, over 100 letters were awaiting him for people who wanted to take contracts into Texas. That same year, 1821, when Stephen F. Austin assumed Moses Austin's impresario contract, in Mexico, the Mexican Revolution would come to an end. The Mexican Revolution would end essentially because a key action had occurred in Spain that helped bring about an end to the Mexican Revolution. King Ferdinand had been forced to adopt during a revolution a liberal Spanish constitution, and the conservative forces in New Spain couldn't believe that the king had agreed to a liberal constitution of 1812 for Spain, and to restore the liberal constitution of 1812. And so the privileged classes of New Spain rose up in a conservative revolution and said, if the king has undercut us and adopted liberal principles, then we conservatives of New Spain are ready to break away Mexico from Spanish authority. Augustin Iturbide was a Creole, a middle-class Spaniard born in New Spain, and he was a Spanish army officer. In that year, 1821, Iturbide convinced the Spanish viceroy that if the viceroy put Iturbide in charge of a 2,500-man Spanish army in the New World, that he would defeat and end the Mexican Revolution. The revolutionists were led by Vicente Guerrero, a mestizo, a mixed-blood individual. But rather than fighting Guerrero, Iturbide, as soon as he took charge of the Spanish army, asked Guerrero if he wanted to negotiate. And in their negotiations, both men decided on February the 24th, 1821, in what was called the Plan de Iguala, to split New Spain away from the Spanish Empire, i.e. to create an independent, moderate, constitutional monarchy for Mexico. And both men proclaimed that in the new Mexican state there would be racial equality by all individuals. And instead of waging war, the two men made peace, a peace that would ensure a victory of the independence of Mexico. Even the last Spanish viceroy, Juan de O'Donoghue, recognized the independence of Mexico in September of 1821. And it was not long after that that Iturbide's forces would enter Mexico City, and now a capital of an independent Mexican state. With that, I want to acknowledge to you that we close out another set of history terms and we open up a new set of terms. For 300 years, Spain had ruled Mexico, and then there had been 11 years of painful fighting for Mexican independence. And so it was that when Mexico found her independence in 1821, the question was, what kind of Mexican national state would be organized to politically control Mexico? Because there were powerful forces. If you take a look at a list of terms under Texas History Terms 3, you find that there were the Ricos. The Ricos were conservatives and politically conservative forces. Then there were the Creoles, middle-class individuals, Spaniards who had been born in New Spain, now Mexico, and the nation. There were the Pobres. Those were liberals, because they were political liberals who favored federalism and liberalization of governmental standards, etc. There were the Hacendados. These were the landed classes, and these were affluent individuals. Very few people owned land in Mexico, in the new Mexican state, and consequently the Hacendados were elites. They considered themselves elites of Mexican society. Then there were the mestizos, the large numbers of mixed blood Indian with Spanish blood, who were essentially landless. Indeed, there was a battle between the conservatives and the liberals about what form of government would be appropriate for Mexico. On the side of the Ricos, the conservatives, you had the army, the Roman Catholic Church. Those were powerful forces that wanted a less than liberal government of Mexico. In fact, we know that Augustine Iturbide, entered Mexico City in September of 1821, and within a year, the new Mexican national state had found a leader, and that leader was Iturbide. He was blessed by the Bishop of Guadalajara, and in late 1822, Iturbide created for himself a monarchy, and he was crowned Augustine I, constitutional monarch of Mexico, emperor for life, as a matter of record, in late 1822. But within weeks, he was denounced by those who did not believe that Mexico needed an empire. And interestingly enough, the Plan de Casamara, criticizing Iturbide as an emperor, was written by a young, idealistic army officer, soon to become important in Mexican history, Antonio Lopez de Saniana. This is the first time that Saniana makes his mark on Mexican history, when he opposes the constitutional monarchy of Iturbide. Within a year, Iturbide will be deposed and exiled to Europe. Now, even before Iturbide was crowned as Augustine I, emperor for life, Anglo-Americans began to settle peacefully into Texas through these impresario contracts that Stephen F. Austin was going to provide. and others who arrived with peaceful intent to settle in the new Mexican state. One of the first to arrive in Anglo-Americans was a man by the name of Andrew Robinson, who arrived in November of 1821, and he would operate a ferry boat at Washington on the Brazos over in East Texas. 2 to 3 days after he arrived, 3 brothers by the name of Kukendall arrived with their families and settled at Independence, again close to Washington on the Brazos over in East Texas. At Christmas 1821, 2 of the 3 Kukendall brothers would relocate and establish themselves at Columbus, Texas, and soon plenty of other Anglo-Americans would come to Texas, and one of the largest and most affluent, largest in terms of wealth and numbers to come to Texas, was Jared E. Gross of Alabama. Gross came to Texas in 50 wagons and 90 slaves. He relocated his Alabama plantation to Texas, and Jared Gross settled at Hempstead outside of Houston. By March of 1822, there were 50 Anglos living on the Brazos to Colorado River on the plains of the flat coastal plains of Texas. This is the site between the Brazos and the Colorado rivers that Stephen F. Austin would bring in even more settlers into with his first impresario contract. Austin, with his New Orleans partner, Joe Hawkins, decided in early 1821 to ship in the first 18 colonists into under his new impresario contract. And the 18 set sail on the schooner Lively from New Orleans. Austin was so excited about starting to fulfill his impresario contract that he crossed overland from New Orleans through East Texas, and the Lively was going to meet Stephen F. Austin at the mouth of the Colorado River. And Stephen F. Austin journeyed to the mouth of the Colorado River, and he got there before the Lively did, and he waited and waited, and the Lively didn't show up, because the captain of the Lively mistook the mouth of the Brazos River and dropped anchor at the mouth of the Brazos River, and then awaited anxiously the arrival of Stephen F. Austin, who was at the Colorado River. And so after a few days, the captain of the Lively returned to New Orleans with virtually all of the 18 settlers, because Austin never showed up, because in fact the captain was in the wrong place. And an embarrassed Stephen F. Austin felt compelled to go to San Antonio and explain to Governor Martinez why in fact he had failed initially in his efforts to bring settlers into Texas. When Austin arrived in San Antonio and talked to Governor Martinez, Governor Martinez informed him that Coahuila-y-Bear, the first state that Texas was part of, we were Bear, and Coahuila was, as it still is, a state within northern Mexico today. And under the Mexican National Constitution of 1824, we'll talk about here in a second, the Bear, B-E-X-A-R, the first name for Texas, Bear was put in with Coahuila because there weren't enough citizens living in Bear, Texas, to justify an independent state within Mexico. And so the capital was in Saltillo, but there were many officials in Monterrey, Mexico. And Martinez acknowledges to Austin that Monterrey officials told him that they doubted the validity of Austin being able to fulfill legally Moses Austin's contract. So Stephen F. Austin immediately left Austin and headed to Mexico City to appeal to the government of Mexico, to Iturbide government at this point, because he's still in power. And Austin arrived in Mexico City in April of 1822. Iturbide was still consolidating his power, and he didn't have time. His government didn't have time for Austin, and so Austin cooled his heels, but he didn't waste his time in Mexico City. Stephen F. Austin learned to speak the Spanish language, and he learned about how Mexican politics worked, while he slowly but surely encouraged Iturbide's government to pass an impresario immigration law that would approve his father's plans and allow him to continue to bring settlers into Texas. On January the 4th of 1823, the Imperial Colonization Law was passed by the Mexican Congress. The Imperial Colonization Law. That means that Iturbide was now emperor, and so all laws were imperial. So the Imperial Colonization Law was passed in January of 1823, and it went into effect almost immediately. But the following month, the Plan de Casamata, written by Santillana, opposing Iturbide, causes Iturbide to slowly lose his grip on power. While this was going, Austin didn't dare leave Mexico City because he didn't know what was going to happen. And so finally, the Mexican Congress, even after Iturbide had abdicated in March of 1823, the Mexican Congress approved a contract for for Stephen F. Austin in accordance with the Imperial Colonization Law. And Austin was very pleased that they acted to approve Moses Austin's contract. But then the Mexican Congress did away with the Imperial Colonization Law. And surprisingly, after approving Stephen Austin's taking over of Moses Austin's contract. That meant that when Stephen F. Austin left to return to Texas, that meant that he was the exclusively the only impresario that was allowed under the national constitution, under the national laws of Mexico by 1823 to actually import Anglos into Texas. And it was a happy Stephen Austin that made his way back to Texas. In early August of 1823, Moses Austin arrived in Texas. He was accompanied by the Baron de Bastrop, his father's friend, who Stephen Fuller Austin empowered to issue land grants. Conditions were pretty bad in Texas in 1823. There had been a drought in 1822. The Indians had been on the warpath, causing many Anglo-American settlers to return to the United States. But Austin's return to Texas turned around the fortunes of his colony. And by the end of the summer of 1824, the Baron de Bastrop had issued 272 titles. Eventually, he would issue 297, rounded off. That is the old 300 of the original land grants given by Stephen Fuller Austin. Even today, we refer to the old 300 as the first 300 families to come to Texas under Stephen F. Austin. Didn't make 300, it was actually 297, but hey, who's counting, right? The capital of Austin's little impresario colony was San Felipe de Austin, and each family that received a land grant either received a labor, L-A-B-O-R, which was 177 acres of land. If a colonist proclaimed himself to be a farmer, or one could receive a sitio, S-I-T-I-O, a sitio, which was 4,428 acres of land if one proclaimed that they were going to go into the ranching business. Now, I told students in class this, I share this with you students who are watching this electronically. What kind of idiot would have said, oh, I don't want to go into cattle ranching. I don't want 4,428 acres of free land. I just want to labor 177 acres so I can go into farming. Not surprisingly, of the original 297 grants issued by the Baron de Bastrop, over 90% of them were for sitios. Obviously, these Anglo-Americans wanted land, and they wanted large amounts of land. And a sitio at 4,428 acres was a heck of a lot more than a labor of 177 acres. As the impresario, Austin himself received 22 sitios. And several semesters ago, I got out my calculator, and that's 97,416 acres of land. Stephen F. Austin received 100,000 acres of land in these 22 sitios. To receive a land grant from Austin, one had to occupy the land within 2 years, and the colonists all had to promise to convert to Catholicism, to become good Catholics, since Mexico was a Catholic country. That the settlers who settled in the impresario contracts would not have any ties and not have to pay duties for 6 full years. And although they could bring their slaves from the United States and slavery was legal, they had to agree that any slave child, baby, born in Texas, would be free, born in Mexico, Mexican Texas, would be freed once that slave child turned 14 years of age. So clearly from the very beginning, the Mexican government wanted to outlaw slavery by setting a date in the future, and slowly but surely a whole generation of blacks would be freed from the institution of slavery. In Mexico, Iturbide fell from power in March of 1823. And the question was, what kind of government would replace Iturbide's? The clergy, the army, the church, the landowners, and the conservative ricos all favored a centralist form of government. A centralist form of government has an all-powerful national government. There is no federal structure. A federal structure divides power between the national, state, and local entities of government. But all power would reside in the hands of a powerful centralist government. The middle classes, the criollos, the mestizos, and the pobres, the liberals, all favored a federalist form of government, similar to the current structure of the American government today under our Constitution of 1787, that divides power in 3 branches of government. The Federalists actually triumphed in the Mexican National Constitution of 1824 that was crafted by the Mexican Congress. But specific clauses gave the Mexican president dictatorial power, and the clergy and the military were given special privileges under the Constitution. Under the Mexican National Constitution of 1824, Guadalupe Victoria became the first Mexican president to serve the Mexican national state. Now, Texan Erasmo Seguin had a big hand in writing the Constitution of 1824, and under that Constitution, Coahuila and Bexar became one state, with the understanding that when the population of Texas, through impresario contracts and migration from the United States, got large enough that Bexar would be split apart from Coahuila and given its own state within the Mexican national state. But the reality is there weren't enough people living in Bexar in 1824 to justify independent statehood for Texas. The capital of Coahuila y Bexar was Saltillo, Mexico, and at Saltillo, a 12-person legislative council did business at Saltillo. There were 12 representatives of the legislative council of Coahuila y Bexar. 9 of them 11 of them originally were from Coahuila, and only one from Bear. And the Baron de Bastrop was our first representative to the Representative Council in Saltillo. Eventually, Texans got a second, and by 1836 there were 3 Texas representatives serving in the legislative council of 12 members at Saltillo. So Mexico didn't cheat Texas in terms of representation. In fact, it was an accurate representation, division between the representatives based on population of Coahuila and Bear. The national, in 1800, and under this Constitution of Mexico, a new national colonization law. The prior one was an imperial law when Iturbide was emperor. Now a national colonization law was passed in August of 1824, and it gave the Mexican national states the right to regulate their own settlements. And March of 1825, Coahuila Bear's legislature passed a state colonization law. Every immigrant coming into Coahuila Bear would be given a sitio, now 4,428 acres of land, in return for a $30 processing fee and for a charge of $62.50 that was payable in 3 installment payments that could even begin, the installment payments could begin in year 5, because every piece of land had to be occupied within 6 years of the grant. So the Mexican government of Saltillo Bear made it very easy. A $30 processing fee, $62.50 charge for a sitio of land, but they could, a settler could conceivably wait to the 5th year and then pay in 3 installments, the $62.50. Contracts, impresario contracts would be granted, and for every impresario contract that one could fulfill, an impresario would receive 5 sitios and 5 labors. A impresario contract had to be for a minimum of 100 families, and impresario could take out as many as 8 contracts, contracting to bring in 800 families. Contracts were for 6 years, and native-born Mexicans could, for an additional fee, born in Mexico, Mexicans now could migrate to Coahuila Bear and purchase up to 11 sitios. Colonists were exempted from taxation for 10 years and customs duties for 7 years. Numerous impresarios attempted settlement, but Stephen F. Austin was the most successful impresario. In addition to his original 300, Austin contracted in 1825 for 500 more families to come into his original grant. In 1827, he contracted for another 100 families for a colony north of his original grant, and Bastrop became the leading city of that new Austin grant. Austin received a grant to settle along the coast, and he settled 300 families between the Lavaca and San Jacinto rivers. All told, Stephen F. Austin was authorized to bring in 1,540 families into Texas before his death. This made Stephen F. Austin the impresario father of Texas for bringing in these so many of these Anglo-Americans. There would be other impresarios that would bring people into Texas, and I'll close with this, and we'll get back together very quickly after the end of this tape. But in 1825, Green DeWitt received a Coahuila Bear contract to settle 400 families along the Lavaca and Guadalupe rivers, and his headquarters, his key town was Gonzales, but the Comanches constantly harassed the settlement at Gonzales. Martin De Leon in 1824 received permission to settle the coast between the Lavaca and Guadalupe rivers with Mexican families from the interior of Mexico, but the problem was that his land grant and De Leon's overlapped. But nevertheless, Victoria was established on the Guadalupe River very early on, and by 1833, Victoria, Texas, numbered some 200 citizens. But there were 22 other impresario contracts that allegedly was going to bring in 8,000 additional families to Texas. But most of those impresario contracts, those 22, never brought in a single family. But there was one particular impresario that was not very scrupled, and his name was Hayden Edwards. And when we start our next tape, we'll talk about Hayden Edwards and his equally unscrupulous brother, Benjamin Edwards, because they will try to do something that the Spanish authorities and even Mexican authorities, once Mexico came into power, feared the most. They attempted a filibustering activity, i.e. a military exercise that could conceivably have broken away Texas from the Mexican national state. And Spain, before she gave up the ghost and turned Mexico independent, and the Mexican national state were fearful of the not impresarios, peaceful intentions, people with peaceful intentions coming to Texas, but they were terribly concerned about filibustering activity, military activity from the United States of America. Hey, we're going to end here, and I'll see you around the block, and I'll see you in the clouds. Take care, and I'll be back with you soon. Bye.